Let's keep roasting my first ever doc for another example, and let's take another look at the database page. Okay, we have a classic do not touch page with everything in it, but we've already covered that in my doc structure episode. We have formulas with lots of hard-coded text, but that we covered in the last week's episode. We also have unformatted formula code, which I'll cover in a dedicated best practices for formula formatting episode. When it's out, I'll link it there. But the thing that I want to cover today is this huge amount of Canvas formulas. There is dozens of them, and it seems that back in the time I extracted every single piece I used elsewhere into a separate Canvas formula. And it's not just me, I've had clients who did the same thing. When I first looked into their do not touch section, I also saw a lot of Canvas formulas and buttons there. Now, why is this a problem? There's two things. First, you're cluttering your global doc namespace. All these Canvas formulas and buttons appear as top-level objects. When you're writing your formulas, they keep appearing in your code suggestions, and the larger and more complicated your doc grows, there's just becoming more of them, and it all becomes unbearable to work with. And the reason number two is that it's bad for performance. We will eventually talk in more detail about performance. What's important here is technically each formula that you have is like a little table with just one row and one cell. And when you have many formulas, that's as if you're creating all those separate tables. And it makes the dependency graph much more complicated, and it's harder for Coda to optimize these graphs. That's why very often when you have named formulas dependent on other named formulas, and then you have a change that should trigger the cascade of updates, Coda will not always resolve the right order in which to update these formulas. It will just keep shuffling the whole doc until the stable state is met. Again, all of this I will cover in greater detail in my deep dive on dependency graphs and digest cycles. For today's short episode, just trust me that this is not desirable. And that's why, if this is relatable to you or not yet, but you didn't see any problem with it before, keep watching to know what to do with it and how I ended up in this place in the first time. Let's go. So what shall we do? Just like the last time, we should create an auxiliary table and put all our calculations there. But unlike the templates table where we were dealing with the same type of data, the text, messages and labels, this time each calculation is on its own. It has its own type and its own formula. Therefore, whereas the templates table was vertical with 2 columns and many rows, this time our utility table will be horizontal with many columns, 1 column for each calculation and only 1 row. So what you have to do is create a utility table like this. Call it HLP Variables. In the past I used to call these HLP constants because I used these tables mostly to put some fixed values in them. But the word variables reflects the changing nature of these formulas better. Delete all rows from it but one, hide the add rows buttons, hide the search, rename the display column to handle, that's just a conventional name I picked for myself, and give it the same value as the name of the table. And of course, for each named formula that you have or want to add, create a separate column, and if you need to calculate one column out of other columns, use this row to reference other columns in the same row. And this is it. Now we have our horizontal utility table for all sorts of variables. Tables like that just have one row and it only makes sense for them to have one row. I have a special name for them, I call them Singleton tables. And why Singleton, I'll tell you later in this video. Now you can already reference these calculations using the at reference to the row. You can use it in a formula like at HLP variables dot and the column name. But we should make it even better. You see, using an at reference is a way to reference any row in your doc. And when your doc is big and you have many rows, you type the at symbol and Coda starts loading all the suggestions for you, and you will feel a little freeze up. So what we shall do instead is create a named formula so that we can get our variables row easier. Now there's two ways to do it, and it depends on whether you're ever going to edit your formula or not. The first one is you open your formula editor, you at reference HLP variables, and you must set the name of the formula right at this step, because once you close the formula editor, this will just become your regular at reference and you won't be able to edit it. You have to erase it and start again. But if you give it a name, and in our case the name should just read variables, and only then close the formula editor, it will still become uneditable, but this at reference will now retain its name and we can totally use it. Now in our case with variables, this is totally fine. I don't think we will ever need to replace it to a reference to any other row. We can just keep adding stuff to this row we already have. But in some other cases you may want to retain this capability, so let me teach you how to do it while we're at it. For this formula to stay editable, all you need to do is make it more complicated than a simple at reference. For example, you may reference the whole table and just pick the first or the only row from it. Now the result will be the same, but you can edit this formula at will. For example, if you happen to accidentally accidentally delete the row and immediately refresh the tab so that you cannot undo the operation, and you have no other choice than to create a new row. This way you will have your centralized place where you will replace your row reference. And now we can reference our calculations easily. In any formula, just type variables, dot, and the name of your column. And this is now nice and organized and feels like you took all those formulas that were hanging around in the global namespace and put them neatly into a folder. Now, what else can you put on these tables? Well, anything. Aside from formulas, you can use it for editable stuff. Like if it's a doc created from a template and you share it with a client, you can put the client's name there. And you can put a secret key there that will allow this client to load only their particular data from the big doc of yours, using, for example, my pack Sync Tables Pro. The link is in the description. And you can put all sorts of constants of different types. Like I would put month names and weekday names here, so that when this doc is translated into another language, a person can translate them here. And I could put some custom colors and other things that I don't want to put on HLP templates. After all, if you don't have many templates, you don't have to even create that table. You can just put them here as a few separate columns. Again, this is just your utility table, so use it for whatever makes sense to you. And besides, it doesn't have to and it shouldn't be your only singleton table in your doc. You are absolutely welcome to create separate singleton tables for each of your processes. Like if I'm populating my table from a form, I have a separate table for that. And when I'm running a duplicate check in my doc, I have a separate table for that. And when I'm running an algorithm to populate my report table, I also have a separate single row table for that. And when in my frozen food shop I'm loading sales data from my bank into our coded doc, I also have a separate table for that. And when for a short time we opened 2 more stores, I just added 2 more rows to this table and set those up with 2 other bank connections. And this wasn't a singleton table anymore, but just like that, effortlessly I copied the same process for 2 other accounts. Imagine what that would be if you had to copy all the formulas and buttons. You'll end up with 3 times the formulas, 3 times the buttons, and all those import data 2, import data 3. I hope you can see the benefit of organizing it all like this yourself. And of course, if you wondered how I did all of these examples I just mentioned, eventually I'll make an episode on each of them. Oh, and I almost forgot to tell you what happened in that first doc of mine. Look at it, there is the singleton table already. So what made me create all those canvas formulas? Well, as embarrassing as it is now to admit, back at the moment I didn't know about the @ references. That's right, I didn't know that I could reference a specific row. I found out that I could reference the table and select a column, but even then I wouldn't just get my value. Since I'm referencing the whole column, even if it's just one row, I would get a list of values. Well, I knew that I could use .first to get a single value out of that list, and that's what I did in each of these formulas. And also I remember that back in the day .first was broken. It's now you can select table.first.column or table.column.first. It would give you the same result. But this only got fixed in like 2020. Previously you couldn't use first in the middle of the formula. So that to me looked like only one way to do it. But then why do I have so many of these formulas? Well, the second reason is that back in the time I didn't know that I could format my formulas. There was no large editor, and I'm not so sure that Shift-Enter worked. So I decided that my formulas were long and unreadable already, and I didn't want to make them even longer by including large expressions based only on select formulas. That's why, yes, pretty much every piece of information I included in any of those messages, I extracted in its own named formula. Now lastly, why a singleton table? Remember in my intro video I told you this would not just be about Coda, but I would try to give you universal knowledge so that you can become a better maker. Whatever I was telling you now in this video doesn't just apply to Coda. Not only it's the best practice, it's actually one of the core principles of object-oriented programming. What you just learned to do here is called encapsulation. In layman's terms, this is when you combine related things under one umbrella, like all formulas and buttons that are relevant to importing the data in the importer table, or all formulas and buttons that are relevant to finding duplicates in the duplicates table. And the second thing from grown-up programming you just learned is the singleton pattern. That's right, this is exactly how we do it in programming world. Like we create an object, a thing to render our report, but we don't need 2 objects like that, we just have one in our whole system, and we call it our singleton object. So you see, when you decide to move past Coda and venture into real programming, which you should totally do, knowing how to code is a very nice skill, even if you're just doing it casually to automate some of your things. So yeah, whenever you choose to venture into that, all of these videos will be a very nice foundation for you, and you will remember these and think, oh, Paul was teaching us good stuff. It's really helpful now. I didn't regret for a single moment that I subscribed to his Patreon and supported the creation of these videos. Oh, and while we're at it, today is the last day of the month. The day we only get once in 4 years. Except that once in 100 years it's not a leap date, but then once in 400 years it is. But the good news is that I'm extending the deadline at which you can get all those docs, including the premium docs, until the 14th of March. First, I just realized that I launched my channel not in the beginning of February, but actually in the middle of the month. And second, I haven't had much chance to promote myself yet, and Coda hasn't tweeted about me yet. So whoever hasn't discovered my channel yet, I want to give them a chance to snag that deal. And that is all from me today, and we still talked about many things, and the next few episodes will be something cool, like did you know there are 8 ways how you can filter a view in Coda? Let's see how many of them you can guess, write them in the comments. And as always, please write in the comments how you liked this episode and whether it was helpful. And also give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and reminding you once again of my Patreon, and I'll see you in the next one.